I'm back. I wanted to talk about Martine Rose's work and the relationship between her work and the spaces that it is in, interpreted in, presented in, and the dialectical relationship between her work and space. And then I also wanted to connect that to her ability to queer men's fashion. It's pride. Okay, it's pride. Make some noise. Vegas, make some noise. But I'm really excited to talk about it. I love Martine Rose's work. I love talking to other people about it and hearing what people think about it. Maybe we can all start the conversation. Okay, so my position is that Martine Rose is able to recontextualize our relationships with each other and ourselves and the spaces that we're in and the fashion that we wear and how all of those connect to each other. With her relentless commitment to authenticity and the believability of her design, and I'm going to explain why that is, and I'm going to explain why that, in my opinion, allows her to continue to pluralize and queer men's fashion. I think, first of all, let's give a little bit background and context.
I'm not sure if it was fully formed as an idea or if I wanted to be a designer until I was quite old, actually. I've definitely always been visual.
Martine Rose is a British fashion designer of Jamaican and English heritage. She has been designing for a very long time. She initially went to school for art and sculpture and then started to pursue fashion design and completed her degree in fashion design. She originally had a brand called LMNOP in the very early 2000s, and by 2007 she had her namesake brand Martine Rose as we know it today. She's known for her oversized, boxy, authentic aesthetic and her contributions to Balenciaga in the form of consulting with Demna. Her brand is relentlessly authentic and oriented around community. And I think that what she does is convey reality as it is, as a way of honoring and bringing dignity to the lived experience. And it is simultaneously transcendent and humanizing without being condescending to her wearer and customer. And I think that that is what's so compelling about her work. That I think that there's such a depth of storytelling that it's almost hard to process the genius of her work.
My shows are much rooted in the people that are there. Do you know what I mean? I'm very into the environment. I'm very into other people. I'm very into the atmosphere.
Getting into complexity at the House of Martine Rose, I think that what she does is bring authenticity in the form of complexity. So one example of this is at her runway show presentations, she juxtaposes people who work in the fashion industry against normal city dwellers and show attendees. She positions workwear next to intimate wear, private next to public, and all of this speaks to the complexity and the multidimensional nature of real life. She's demonstrating authenticity rather than marketing it. In real life, we are intimate, private people. We have private experiences, but we also have public experiences and public-facing selves. And when I talked about Ingmar Bergman's persona and how much of our lives that we have to reconcile that we are performing rather than living authentically, I think that this is directly connected to that. It's kind of complex because it's all a performance, but it's all real, and it's all real in that it's all a performance. And I think that her work very critically addresses that, and I think that, again, that's part of why it's so compelling. I also think the complex understanding Martine Rose has of other people and conveying people authentically through her work is also connected to the sensuality of her work and voyeurism. She has a very sensitive and sensual, it seems, relationship with studying other people down to very minute details in order to carve out these really complex characters on the runway. But I do think that this is connected to a secret undertone of which I think is connected to the sensuality, which I think is connected to the nightlife and underground culture aspect of this brand, the lingerie and hosiery, the different ways that we contextualize space and intimacy and privacy and what we wear in private versus public, her constant revisiting of how we exist in our homes versus in the public, etc. I think that voyeurism is a part of her brand identity, maybe secretly, underground or theoretically. In real life, you do have to go to work after being in your private house or wherever you experience life before you go to work, and sometimes those experiences can overlap, and her work speaks to that overlap rather than ignoring it or creating distinction between it. And I think that that's what puts us in this position of representing the authentic experience of life. I think that if she were doing a sort of costuming, it might look like these simple, singular representations of workwear, and then a separate look that is a single representation of intimate wear, etc. Instead, she combines them in a way that is so realistic and speaks to, the human experience. And again, I think that that brings dignity to the human experience, to acknowledge that it is complex.
A really important part of what we do for Martine is ensuring it's a really inclusive show. So we have a real mix of people that are part of the audience, and we have a real the setting is really important. Like when we did the show in London, on the street in Kentish Town, the Love Letter to London, again, all the neighbours were out, all the children were out. An important part of Martine's DNA is this sort of warmth and community and celebration of just realness.
And so the way that she does this and translates this through her runway shows is she works with her good friend and the stylist for her shows, Tamara Rothstein, and they combine together to use cut, fit, drape, accessory design, in my opinion, character design, in order to convey the depth and complexity of her wearer. There is so much attention to detail. It seems impossible that someone could come up with all these perfectly harmonious but also perfectly contradictory ways of presenting identity at once on each model, and it still comes across as authentic without looking belabored or fake. And in this way, in my opinion, she represents her community.
It didn't form into like a designer until I was probably about 20.
So I want to talk about how her work is oriented around community in a little bit more depth. So I said that, in my opinion, part of why she focuses so much on community is because she loves relationships. She had a campaign in 2021 when we were still in lockdown that included Drake, the rapper, and it depicted his private life and his relationship with her and her work and her clothes, and several other people's relationships with the people in their lives and how that connects to the Martine Rose brand. And it was a really warm and tender presentation of life in such a difficult time, and it brought together the community of people who are appreciators of her work. And I think that's something that's really important to her, that form of togetherness. I'll talk a little later about the times that she's said that she experienced this form of like radical togetherness and radical love and community. But I think that that togetherness is still a huge part of the way that she designs clothes, rather than creating this exclusive, impossible, aspirational brand that separates us all and becomes like this exclusive tribe. She's like welcoming people into the tribe of Martine Rose, because she genuinely seems to value that togetherness and what the togetherness can mean and inform in each other, and what it can be connected to in terms of larger power structures and dismantling them, punk subcultures and things like that.
I love the anticipation of something happening.
And so because of this, she shows her work in her fashion runway show presentations at the local food market, at community centers, at her daughter's primary school. And again, this speaks to what I said earlier about bringing together people who are buyers in the fashion industry next to regular everyday people. People have relationships with her and her community of people, and they're all together. If you watch her runway shows or look at the pictures, you'll notice that they're all very, very filled. Her runway presentations seem like an event to gather people around appreciating community, togetherness, fellowship, and expression of art. And it feels like almost a collaborative experience where people are there to express and connect, and she's there to express and connect. And it's not just about her positioning herself above this audience or, creating an exclusive environment for herself and the audience to position themselves above the rest of the public enjoying the show. It feels like it's something for everybody to explore and enjoy, and that I think is very apparently expressed through her work. So she fleshes out believable characters in this way. Another example is her Pity show. So her show at Pity was based on representing working class Florentine people. She depicted workers, shoppers, and everyday dwellers of Florence. And this was an opportunity to put her work on the world stage in this very glamorous, high level, possibly exclusive, aspirational platform. And she instead worked to again depict the local community, and not from the perspective of a tourist trying to find all of the highlights of an experience in Florence, but instead from the perspective of somebody who is there on the ground and the working, living, breathing environment that's created because of those people. And again, that reciprocal relationship between the people and the environment, which again goes back to her appreciation of relationships. the relationship between everything and how that creates the dynamic of a space that she's in. And I think that because of that, she's able to depict things like the private versus public life, the combination of how they intersect. Samantha Conti wrote that in order to pay respect, she embraces it as a living, breathing city. And I think that she wants to depict the people who make the city move rather than view it as a place that she is a complete outsider. I think she wants to envelop herself in the space there and, take what she can get from it and contribute what she can to it. And I think that shows her strength as a designer, but so does her ability to wield luxury fabrics in order to communicate that. So she does these commercially viable designs like the shopping bag, luxury bag, but she doesn't make it too stylized or unrealistic or impossible. But she's also able to bring imagination, but she's also able to humanize and flesh out these people that she presents on her runway. And do it again through these high luxury and clever fabric combinations, mohair, moleskin, classic tailoring. She likes worn-in appearing fabrics and washed fabrics because it makes the wearer feel like it's possible to incorporate it into their wardrobe, but I'll talk about that later. That's what makes it so fun and playful. The way I talk about it sometimes can seem really sexless and austere and serious, but it's only because I can't say certain words on the internet, on these platforms, and talk about like intimacy and eroticism and sexiness and kink and things like that, which I think are very present in her work and connected to like queering menswear. She also brings complexity to her wearer's world with playful depictions of political commentary, like the Promising Britain shirt, for example. I appreciate how she's able to address political issues in Britain and global issues and kind of the impact that this negative society can have on us, but with some degree of optimism and hope. I think things like this speak to her really complex perspective on the world. She doesn't ignore the bad in the world, but she's also not going to present it in a way that is miserable and hopeless, I don't think. Another example of this is 2017 spring. She has these nightlife inspired fashion that also look like acquired clothes, secondhand shops and things like this. Or in spring 2018, she has hoodies with outdoor climbing clothes that look like post-work realness. Like I am going to my office job, but it's maybe a creative office job and I'm allowed to bring my bike in. And as well, in terms of campaigns, she has campaigns that revolve around her own interests and the interests of her community and her ability to represent that in a way that's realistic, like the work that she does with the Nike women's soccer team. She's presenting a collection with Nike next month in July as well that will be tailored Nike pieces, which is completely new and very interesting. I can't wait. But it's also going to be shown during the FIFA Women's World Cup. It's not just an aesthetic for her that's passing and fleeting that'll be on the runway one season and off of the runway the next. She's able to translate these codes of design through that specific interest, which is sport and specifically football, season after season. So then in terms of, now that we've talked about her complexity and her ability to bring complexity to her work as a form of authenticity, I think that she's also able to bring that to the community spaces in which she shows her work. The way that she's showing in community centers and her ability to reference community centers for rave and nightlife experiences and partying and things like that speaks to the transformable ability of spaces, right? So a community center can change and grow and almost be a living space in its own right. It's a community center, which, she talks about how they're historically very British and exclusive in that way, and then they start transforming over time to accommodate more and more immigration as immigration increases there. And so then they become these like immigrant-oriented spaces. And then they're able to transform them into like dance and nightlife spaces that get rented out.
I'm in my final round of editing, and what I'm realizing is that what I appreciate about Martine Rose is the same thing that I appreciate about the mysterious, mundane, eerie, surreal aesthetic. And it is how you can find beauty in everyday life and then create depth through that beauty in the same way that Meliana Julian does and in the same way that Jürgen Teller does. I think that Martine Rose pulls the beauty out of reality and expands on it without having to beautify it or make it artificial. And I think the grit and humanity of what she finds beautiful is conveyed through her work.
It speaks to the complexity of valuing ever-changing environments and reactive environments. and how the environment can change based on who's in it. And that's why I think she's so focused on representing the community of people who shape the world around them. She likes people's ability to interact with the space and the impact that that space can have on the people, and that reciprocal dialectical relationship that exists there, and how that brings complexity to life. And again, it goes back to her working to honor life, in my opinion. And I think that she also appreciates that those kinds of environments can bring people on the fringe together in order to collaborate, from immigrants to queer people to party people to those overlapping identities and how they intersect. And that brings me to the concept of nightlife in community centers. It's changing where we party. It's not a traditional club for traditional people to dress traditionally and for nightlife to look one way. It's the ability to experiment with and transform and change the spaces that we exist in. People on the fringe are trying to have fringe experiences. It can mean that we're experiencing different things in a different space, and again, then we're having that reciprocal relationship with how we experience intimacy in a different space and how we experience nightlife in a different space, and how that shapes how we interact with our reality and our communities, etc., and how that builds upon itself to create culture. And I think that that's what her work revolves around. And so even though it seems so simple because she's doing these casual, sort of relaxed men's clothes, I think that her work speaks to all of that in a very deep, plural, complex way that I might not even be able to convey in a video. I hope I can, though. And that brings me to queer culture and how this is connected to queer culture. So you have the collection where Marina Belfon-Rose does smudged, sexy makeup that looks like you've just been kissing somebody at the club, in my opinion, but they're wearing like workwear, but also kind of nightlife wear, and also like serious trousers and loafers and sports shoes, and all of these different intersecting and overlapping spaces, like clothes that are suited for certain spaces, are combined on the models at once, and then they're experiencing and in this one body. So the New York Times covered this collection and talks about how Gary Gill was the hairstylist for the collection, and the wigs reference progressive gender politics of iconic London club nights in the 80s to 90s. For example, Kinky Gerlinky, and I wanted to talk about that as well.
Everybody was dressing down and we wanted to dress up, so we started a club just to have parties, and it started with all our friends, and it just grew.
In the Blitz days, it was very stuck up and everybody was kind of very precious. It's not like that anymore. People are just kind of coming here to have a scream.
Just adore coming to Kinky Gerlinky because it just is like the wackiest world, and I see all my friends here and they're wearing spooky outfits.
Just great fun. I think it's got the best people in London, the best vibe, and it's like the easiest thing to do here.
So Kinky Gerlinky is an influential brutish club night in 1989 London, and it was hosted by Michael and Gerlinde Kostiff, hosted by Wynne Austin, and it ends in 1994 when Gerlinde unfortunately passed away. And there is coverage of this by Dick Jewell, and he has a film about it that you can watch, and he also has a YouTube channel with some of the clips from the different events and nights. And the Dick Jewell documentary called Kinky Gerlinky has recordings of the parties at 21 different events, but what it shows is these very fringe subcultural aesthetics. You have queer and trans people, you have drag queens, you have non-binary people, you have musicians, performers, club people, party people, and people who are dressed up in costume, and people who are there for self-expression and community and fellowship that they may not otherwise have. And it's a space where people can create connectivity, foster fellowship, like I said, in order to connect to other people. And it's described as London's most hedonistic queer fashion avant-garde party. Boy George would attend, Lee Bowery would attend, Vivienne Westwood would attend, all of these very cutting-edge people who worked to advance London's culture and society on the fringe. Building a relationship with identity in that way, I think, is completely conveyed through Martine Rose's work to reference like these nightclub scenes and club looks and audience and expressions of the blending that she does and the ambiguity of gender, and the fact that half of her customers, I don't know if it's most, but I think it's over 50% of her customers are women, even though she only shows menswear. And on her runways, regardless of gender, people are walking. Regardless of cut or traditions of menswear or womenswear tailoring, J. Macaulay Bose says that they're always anglicized versions of what menswear actually is, and they're never global perspectives. They never include different Asian depictions of what menswear can look like. They don't include Japanese fashion. They don't include different Nigerian fashions that aren't so similar to British, for example, tailoring. And they're exclusive in that way, and they seek to reinforce and do reinforce hegemony and singular constructions of manhood and masculinity. You're saying that there is not one way to be a man, and the one way to be a man is not this exclusive, patriarchal, oppressive, singular, British, Anglo man. Again, to me, this connects to her relationship with spaces. She talks about how she would go to church with her grandparents and then go to Clapham Common, which is a South London park, and she would go there on Sundays, where I think what I understand is that people would go to raves and then end up at the park afterwards where they're still continuing the party, and she's like 9 years old dancing with these like Rastas and ravers. In terms of reconceptualizing community centers, again, Samantha Conti talks about how there's a time in London when people used to co-opt rooms or community spaces to go dancing or have a club night. That's another way of like recontextualizing sensuality, placing intimates on models, workwear, office, construction work, fashion, just as appropriating community center for a club. It's connected and makes sense and broadens the meaning. But she's interacting with different kinds of people and different energies safely in order to, you know, build this fellowship and relationship with the space that she's in, which again is being transformed. The park becomes the post-rave outlet, right? You go to the rave and then you get let out of the rave and then everybody goes somewhere else.
So this speaks to the transformation of different spaces based on how people are able to interact with them. The park transforms into this recreational outdoor space and into a second festival or club or rave space. It transforms into a safe space for people exiting church, and it transforms into a completely new space where it's for both people who are exiting church, passing by, trying to go to the park, or trying to continue the party from the nightclub or the rave, and people interact with each other based on the way that it has been recontextualized based on their ability to interact with this space. And I think that Martine Rose's work speaks to that very complex, layered, interrelational dynamic that exists when we actually interact with people. That warm, real dynamic that occurs based on human relationships.
I spoke earlier about her ability to collaborate. She's collaborated with Nike, Ben Trill, Clarks, Stussy, Timberland, CAT, LLLC, but I think she has a real skill at collaborating because she's able to meet her needs in terms of expression while connecting the audience of people that she's speaking to when she's collaborating to her vision of the world, which I think sometimes designers have trouble with. It's just two names next to each other, whereas I feel like Martine Rose, because she has so much experience with fellowship and bringing people together, and her work is so oriented around community, I think that that's what contributes to her success collaborating. Not to say that I fully get everything that she does. I keep working to understand her, and also am fine not understanding every single thing about her work. I think that there's some fun in the mystery and not trying to over-intellectualize everything. But yeah, I think her work is worth learning about. I love her. I love Martine Rose. I'm so thankful for her in the fashion industry and for what she presents. And I think what her work does is reminds us of the complexity of life. It just creates like a spiritual exchange with the world, and the way that she honors the lived experience and the complexity of it brings so much dignity to our lived experiences in our world and her customer, rather than playing them and being condescending to them. And I don't know, that brings dignity to my life, in my opinion, to investigate it and experience it and witness it. And I'm thankful to be able to witness it. Live, laugh, love Martine Rose. Hope you have a great day. I'll be uploading this and then my vlog about my life and as many things as I humanly can. I love you guys, and it's so much fun to talk about fashion with you. So, peace.